Good evening to all of you, our dear friends everywhere. It's an honor and a pleasure to join you in this wonderful forum. First and foremost, I would like to congratulate the Louvre Abu Dhabi for its third anniversary for the inauguration of the Louvre. I would like to thank the organizers, and I would also like to thank New York University Abu Dhabi and all the work teams for organizing this highly important forum, which reminds us that we are partners and that we are one family. Whether in prosperous times or in trying times, words such as collaboration, solidarity, and healing, which have been repeated frequently over the past couple of days, have been quite genuine and highly influential. I will tell you more about the conception of tomorrow's museums as a visitor who wants to see her needs met and her wishes accomplished just like all other visitors, and to build a mental image of museums in the future. We spontaneously remember our personal experiences with museums in the past and the museums that we visit nowadays, which undoubtedly have had the great role in shaping our conceptions and beliefs about the development of man and the tools and capabilities and arts of human beings. By saying so, of course, I cannot overlook the role of education, which we received over the different stages of our lives. And I cannot underestimate the importance of individual efforts to learn history through reading and research. I would also like to refer to the fact that good museums can be more like educational facilities, which reflects civilizations and have a sublime cultural impact and an unparalleled impact. The museums that have been developed up till now have contributed in boosting our understanding of history and humanity and the universe and art, and provided to us highly influential examples in all walks of lives. Definitely, every individual has his own story with museums and how they perceive of their own experience and how they affected the shaping of their knowledge and monitoring the accelerated changes that they faced over the past period of time, and also the solutions that have been implemented in those museums, particularly in terms of the mandatory shift towards new systems that included the services that were able to be developed and shifted to digital format. There have been many tangible achievements that have been made over a short period of time, even not in a fully complete manner. Regardless of how happy we are with the current solutions, these attempts have met people's needs over the past period of time. One way or another, these shape the primary features which reflect further development that will be achieved and that we hope to see over the upcoming years. And this will be more like a qualitative shift towards a more resilient and flexible infrastructure that will enable us to have super digital and virtual experiences that will summarize many stages. As I mentioned before, we are shaping our concepts based on our prior experience, and on this occasion I would like to remember two prominent events that I've experienced at some point of time in my life. The first event was when I traveled with my aunts to the Egyptian Museum in the late 1970s. This was the second museum I ever entered, second only to Dubai Museum at Bur Dubai. I remember that my elder aunt, after we finished our rich tour in the Egyptian Museum, which was full of obelisks and artifacts and stone museums and great artifacts from ancient Egypt. Afterwards, my aunt refused to go to any other museum, and she kept saying, "I don't want to watch any more stones." As for the second experience, it was when I traveled on an educational journey organized by the arts department in our university to visit Italy, and this with the purpose of studying the history of art and getting to know the works of art that we have studied already. After the end of the semester, I was very excited and proud to take my family on a tour on some of those museums and churches where I learned a lot about them. I wanted to share with them this information. However, after a number of visits, one of my relatives said, "Please, I don't want to watch any more coffins." Nowadays, these examples may sound like examples coming out from ancient times because they belong to the 1970s and the 1990s of the past century. However, these examples reflect a highly important segment of the community today, a segment of the community that still perceive of statues and artifacts as stones and coffins and sarcophaguses as signs of death, and if they perceive of modern art, they think that these are just scribbles on paper. So this is part of the educated segment of the community, yet they have different taste. They have a different taste and they need a different type of content that is consummate with their taste and their perception. Was the problem in those two examples in the individuals or in the mechanisms of displaying those historic treasures, or maybe in both of them? To answer this question, I will highlight another example. 3 years ago, only 3 years ago, we were in another family visit to Lyon in France, and we visited Musee de Confluence, which I consider one of the most beautiful and one of the most important modern museums nowadays. It is dedicated to anthropology and the science of evolution and history of life. By coincidence, we had the same relative who could not stand watching any more coffins back in the 1990s in Italy. But this time, he was moving from one story to another and from one section to another with a great deal of enthusiasm and passion. It seemed that he was very interested in the different departments and subjects provided in that museum, which provided in-depth anthropological concepts, and the segments and the different samples and artifacts were displayed in a highly advanced manner and in technologically advanced approaches. The approach was simple yet exciting. After we finished our tour, he said, "If you ever lose me in the city, you will find me here in this museum." Actually, all of us, while we were on that tour in that exceptional museum back then, we were quite astonished and excited and felt a great deal of contentment and happiness. This experience in particular provided us with an opportunity to see this approach of how to interact with the information and connected us via a smart app that made it easy for us to move from one location to another and get the necessary information, despite the fact that apps back then were not as advanced as the ones we have now. This pandemic, which the world is facing nowadays, has pushed us quickly and more like a fierce storm. It pushed us to reconsider many of the services that we tried to benefit from, and to reconsider those services was actually a highly important step as well, and a highly beneficial one, as it provided us with temporary and sufficient solutions during the time of the crisis. However, at the personal level, and because of these solutions, I started comparing the virtual experience to the site visit, and I came up with two theories: the theory of going to the museum to obtain knowledge, and the theory of going to have a new experience. Since visiting history museums was quite tiring for me, I felt that I can accept visiting such museums in a virtual manner. However, what about arts museums? To be honest, my relationship with museums has evolved actually because of my personal interest in art. This does not mean that the other types of museums are not important. Quite the opposite. I learned a lot about works of art and history and humanity and the universe by visiting the museums which provided all of those aspects. I remember that one of the reasons why I visited the Louvre Museum in Paris was to see the Mona Lisa, for instance. And the reason why I visited the Vatican Museum in Rome was to see Sistine Chapel ceiling by Michelangelo and Raphael. I believe that many individuals are motivated by such reasons to go and watch these works of art that have been highly influential in their memory since they were little children. That is why they stand with a great deal of determination in long queues to enter those museums and those grand museums. I can tell you about standing in those long queues to enter these museums. This was a horrific experience for me at the beginning because we were not used to such an experience in my home country. Yet, with the repetition of this process and my need to go to those museums, it became a tolerable experience. And even with that, this experience itself is an exciting one. Waiting for hours to enter the museum makes you really perceive of the importance of the upcoming experience. You say to yourself, if art has been so important to me, to put up with all those difficulties, it is definitely of a refined and high status in life for me and for other people who are joining me in celebrating this great experience and this great art by standing in those long queues. These highly important early experiences for me were really a sufficient motivation to go and visit other museums that tender to modern arts and the postmodernism arts. And thanks to those journeys, I discovered many works of art and many artists that I've never heard of, and they turned later on to be inspirational artists for me. Yes, art is the element that has always been motivating me to discover new museums. And when I visited the cities for the first time, the arts in those museums were the elements that encouraged me to quickly visit those cities, to watch them up close. And when I say up close, I mean at a very close distance, yes. It means a lot to me to stand in front of a work of art to feel how important it is compared to my own perception. I believe that it is difficult to feel the awe-inspiring nature of Louise Bourgeois' Spider unless you stand in front of that work of art and move around it. I may be one of the people who are not content with watching a work of art. I also need to touch it. I know that these habits are not accepted by the systems in place in museums, which are quite cautious, and I really worry when we have highly heightened level of security, because I fear that security guards will blame me when I do something like that. People like me, of course, need samples that they can easily interact with my own senses. I will get back to this concept later on when I talk about the considerations that must be taken into account for future museums. The experience of standing in front of a work of art physically and without the social distancing rules which are being promoted heavily nowadays, these are highly important experiences in my own experience. This experience in particular, I mean getting up close to a work of art and interacting with it and sensing it in the way that they were created by their innovative artists, is a unique experience. It really seeps into our consciousness through our senses, and they take a highly important segment of our understanding of art and the specifications of art and the different artistic styles. Moreover, we are further influenced by this experience, and we turn from spectators watching works of art to people who promote those works of art and champion those works of art whenever they are criticized. Personal experiences make us grow exponentially. We need a repetition of such experiences to develop our aesthetic senses. Can this be achieved virtually? And can this be efficient when it is virtual? Our concerts require its own time and its own programming to crystallize. And in order to crystallize, they have to go the filters of different experiences, mode and material experiences, mental and sensory experiences. There have been frequent discussions over the past couple of days about the collections and narratives, and the narratives that can be used to transform the experience from a general one to an individual one. This concept is highly important because it can be used to change and transform our perception of artifacts and collections and grant us stories that make us feel unified with them. Speaking of the narratives, I want to underscore the concept of language, the language connected with narratives, because language is the means of communication. It has a humane perspective and an individual one, and a national one in a different perspective. Museums have selected national languages, unfortunately, and they have neglected other languages. They have widened the cultural gap between people because those who are fluent in the languages used in museums have a better opportunity to get to know the collections and contents of those museums in a more in-depth manner and enjoy the experience more than others. And this increases and boosts the culture of those who can speak those languages and know those languages, unlike the other visitors who are not fluent in that language. So I believe that if those services are available to our people, for instance, this would have enabled us to convince them to visit museums and to enjoy their collections and to benefit from the auditory mechanisms used in them. The new museums, I believe, are responsible for bridging these cultural gaps and changing the old mentality among individuals, the mentality that used to perceive of this as a luxury or something that is beyond regular understanding. Art is actually another form of providing artistic approaches and highlighting their concepts and their preoccupation with the causes of their time and their own convictions and their artistic approaches. It is the code, art is the code through which one generation can pass knowledge from one generation to another. And I'm quite confident that only good museums are the ones that can innovate a way of deciphering this code. I do not hope that technology will rob us of the genuine flavors of museums. I hope they will not separate us from the arts of work and create virtual barriers around them. But at the same time, I do feel that museums should go beyond the traditional ways of delivering this knowledge, whether with regards to their architectural design or the way they display works of art or artifacts, or even to innovate topics that are of interest to people. Poetry is as important as any type of art, but it has been neglected in museums. I visited 3 museums about poets, and all of those museums were located in Europe. This is a token of excellent civilization, of course. However, these museums were quite modest, despite the fact that there were other museums in the same series that I visited, and they were highly sophisticated museums and using complex technology. It will be highly beneficial to have institutions collaborate with one another to increase the level of creativity in terms of the mechanisms of display and the type of information and topics that museums should focus on. As for the way of narrating or introducing information, they should be based on well-structured and attractive mechanisms instead of unattractive content. Providing samples which are similar to the composition of the real works of art, ones that can be sanitized frequently, this will be necessary for the museums which seek to reshape their services, because this is an important means of learning and innovation and creativity. Moreover, this an inspiring piece or similar sample of an art of work may be an inspiration for a new creative artist. I hope that every time we enter a museum or a new museum, a museum that was designed with a great deal of love and compassion and innovation and creativity and has rich services, I hope we can be restructured in terms of our mentality and having our mentality reshaped to remove some traditional concepts and replace them with innovative concepts and change some of the social habits that have been quite prevalent and be more open to culture and to knowledge and innovation. We are really open to all types of information and visions and concepts and trends from all sources. We are now at an age where these sources of knowledge should work together and collaborate within unified contexts or complement one another. It is highly important to have museums become part and parcel of our lives. At least they should represent an important part of 50% of the population's lives to achieve part of the cultural project that can impact the community as a whole. And here I'm referring to the ecosystem that we seek to see in reality. Finally, I hope that museums, which have been reshaped in a new manner to become sources of inspiration, joy, and unforgettable memories. Thank you very much for listening, and I wish you all the best.